so much weight. Is it true? Are hormones really to blame for all of your perceived body composition issues? In order to answer those questions, let's rewind. Think about all of the other things your body does for you on a daily basis. Without you even thinking about it, blood continues to pump through your veins and oxygen flows through your lungs. Immune cells help to fight off infection, and the kidneys filter out harmful substances from circulation. And what is the common link between your nutrition, your exercise, and your normal physiological processes and your body composition? The answer is that these processes could not occur without the help of hormones or chemical messengers that act on specific target organs and tissues to help cause cellular responses. And as we've discussed, these responses are essential to help you gain muscle and lose fat. The hormones that initiate these cellular processes are complex and play a critical role in the regulation of metabolism and maintenance of body composition. Your physique and overall health are strongly influenced by certain controllable factors like diet and physical activity. However, some things beyond your control also contribute to body shape and size, such as genetics, your race or ethnicity, sex, and age. In this lecture, I'll talk about hormonal influences on body composition, consider the uncontrollable factors of sex differences and aging changes, and the controllable factors like diet and exercise. There are many different hormones that we can talk about, but this lecture will focus on insulin, cortisol, catecholamines, and the thyroid hormones. There are many hormones that can play a role in your ability to store or burn fat, or make you feel hungry or full. Let's start with one I mentioned earlier, and that you've probably heard of, insulin. Insulin is one of the more commonly known hormones. This is because of the huge prevalence of diabetes in the United States and globally. Insulin acts on the liver, fat tissue, and muscles, and is one of the many hormones required for human growth and development. Insulin's main function is to help regulate blood sugar levels. After you eat and your blood sugar begins to rise, the beta cells of your pancreas secrete insulin, which helps take glucose out of your blood and put it into the cells where it can be stored or used as energy. At the same time, insulin releases signals to your brain that you are fed, and this can act like a satiety signal, which will help you feel full. So insulin is a storage hormone. It wants to store everything. So not only does it store sugar, but it also helps you store fat. When insulin is released, it activates an enzyme called lipoprotein lipase, or LPL, which not only moves fat into fat cells for storage, but it simultaneously inhibits lipolysis, or fat breakdown. This is designed so that you have a storage depot to draw energy from during times when you're not eating. Evolutionarily speaking, human beings could not always just walk into a grocery store and buy food when they were hungry. So it really acts as a protection or survival mechanism. Insulin has another role too. It can increase your ability to add muscle mass. This is because insulin-stimulated glucose uptake into muscle cells also enhances muscle protein synthesis by increasing the transport of amino acids into your muscles. So when insulin is released, you essentially go into storage mode rather than burning mode and turn off your ability to use fat as a fuel. Now, let's consider this in relation to what you eat. Very high carbohydrate meals tend to raise insulin levels to the highest level. Also, the glycemic index, or the relative amount that a food raises your blood glucose level, can predict your insulin response. The higher the glycemic index of the carbohydrate, the more it will raise insulin. This acute rise in insulin is normal and really not a problem. Your body handles it, and then blood glucose and insulin will return to lower concentrations. However, if you constantly bombard your system with overloads of high carbohydrate meals, your insulin will always be high. This means that you're likely spending more time in fat storing mode than you are in fat burning mode. If this pattern continues for long periods of time, you may become insulin resistant. This is when your cells don't respond to the insulin well. So your blood sugar is not as well controlled, and your body is forced to produce more and more insulin to have the same impact on reducing your blood glucose levels. So yes, we need insulin, and it is critical to our health and survival. However, it is best to avoid massive swings in insulin concentrations. Instead, aim to keep your insulin levels stable by consuming most of your carbohydrates as vegetables or whole grains. These foods tend to have lower glycemic index values, meaning they don't raise your blood glucose very much when you eat them, compared to sweets, some breads, or juice, which all have higher glycemic index values. Protein and fat can also influence insulin, but not to the same extent as carbohydrates. So it may be beneficial to think about building your typical meal as protein first, good quality fats and vegetables next, and then other low glycemic index carbohydrates. This may seem like a lot to think about, but don't let it stress you out, because next we'll talk about the stress hormone cortisol and the many reasons why it is important to understand. Cortisol, commonly known as the stress hormone, is often blamed for weight gain, poor health, and a slew of other headline-friendly half-truths. But the truth is that cortisol is actually very important to our overall health, helping our bodies to have a healthy response to physical stressors, as well as other life stressors like crying children, deadlines, or even traffic. Cortisol is produced and released from the adrenal glands as part of a complex pathway known as the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, or HPA axis. One interesting thing about cortisol, and many hormones, is that it is released according to your circadian rhythm. This means that it follows a pattern based on the time of day. It is highest in the morning to help with wakefulness and to help provide energy after the overnight fast. And it is lowest at night, allowing for rest and recovery. The cortisol that is released in response to normal daily patterns, or even to stress, is actually very useful for us metabolically. It helps us to use our stored glucose, fat, and protein as energy to deal with the stresses we perceive. Additionally, cortisol can temporarily improve brain and immune function to help you overcome a fear, meet a deadline, or try new exercises. Cortisol also helps to decrease inflammation, which is why you might have cortisone injections into knees, wrists, or other problematic areas as you age. In fact, certain autoimmune disorders like rheumatoid arthritis have been linked to suppressed HPA axis activity and chronically low cortisol levels. Cortisol has been observed to act pretty fast. After roughly 30 minutes, cortisol will begin to degrade, and the HPA axis will stop releasing it. So the cortisol response to an acute stress like exercise is really not long, and it's quite useful. Also, cortisol is going to be produced in your body. So even in a theoretical stress-free environment, you would still produce cortisol according to that circadian rhythm. In fact, if you had chronically low cortisol concentrations, there's a good chance you would feel uncomfortably tired and weak. So, how would it become chronically elevated? And is it making you store fat? In the nutrition and fitness world, the perception is that high cortisol equals high body fat. But is this true? Well, we know that in extreme clinical cases, like those who have Cushing's disease, in which cortisol is very high all the time, fat gain is typically seen in the belly or abdomen, in the face and neck. In addition, with chronically high cortisol levels, muscle can be broken down to provide energy. And over time, you see how this would lead to less muscle and more fat. Well, less muscle and more fat is probably not the body composition change that you're going for. So yes, very high levels over a long time can lead to fat storage, particularly in your visceral fat, the fat surrounding your organs. And chronically high cortisol is also linked to psychological factors like depression, anxiety, and grief, and to physical factors like extreme levels of exercise combined with little rest and recovery. In these situations, not only are changes in your metabolism occurring, but your immune system may also become weak. This is why many people associate high stress or extreme exercise over a long period of time with greater occurrence of sickness. Even though exercise and other stressors can temporarily increase cortisol, and cortisol in chronically elevated situations is associated with fat storage, any change in body weight or body fat is probably due to the fact that many people deal with these stresses by eating more and making poor food choices. So don't shy away from physical activity. Normal levels of exercise are not likely to cause chronically high levels of cortisol. In fact, exercise for about an hour a day should help keep cortisol levels within normal ranges. The point is that cortisol must be present in your body. It is extremely helpful metabolically, and even if you are completely stress-free, your cortisol values won't drop dramatically. The issues with cortisol happen when cortisol is chronically elevated. In response to stress, exercise, or a frightening situation, many other hormones can also be released. Two of these hormones are called the catecholamines, and they are important contributors to body composition changes. Let's pretend that you're taking a walk through the woods, and a bear jumps out in front of you. In this situation, your body immediately and automatically does something really cool. It prepares you to deal with the situation as best it can. We refer to this as the flight or fight response. In this fight or flight